Well, just to start things off, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, what are your language pairs and your background with these languages, and then what kind of made you want to study languages and pursue this route in life?
Oh, how long have you got? So I started learning languages very young. I was born in England, but I grew up in Kuwait in the Middle East. So basically, from age 1 to 10 years old, I was out in Kuwait, so I was always around Arabic. So I learned English with my family, and we went to like an American school, so I learned English, but then I was surrounded with the Arabic. I was fascinated by it. It was awesome that people were speaking a different language. That just, I don't know, for me that was it. I was hooked. And I started learning French very early, when I was in primary school, or maybe even, I can't remember what it was exactly, but I've been studying French for many years. I loved it. I feel like I excelled at it. Just seemed to click. I enjoyed it, and it seemed to work. Something in my head seemed to understand it, and it clicked. And then I came back. My family moved back to England, and carried on with my French. I had a much better level than anybody else at my age, because they were kind of starting, as beginners, whereas I had some basic stuff. Obviously, the stuff I was doing when I was in primary school wasn't, serious conjugations and all that kind of stuff, but I had a good base to work with, some vocabulary and stuff. But I didn't start my Spanish actually until starting college, and that was like a quick, got to get through it as quickly as possible kind of program. So it was very accelerated, and it was full out. I think it was only beneficial. It was only possible to do because I had the French to kind of rely on. And so you have some things that are kind of similar, so you can kind of understand, okay, this is the subjunctive, this is kind of how it works. And I could wrap my head around that. But yeah, so I did French and Spanish at college. I tried to pick up some Portuguese, tried to pick up a bit of Arabic. So like I got some, very basic understanding of the grammar and stuff in those languages. Spent a couple of years after I graduated, spent a couple of years in Spain teaching English, and that's really when I nailed down a lot of the grammar and vocabulary and stuff like that, stuff you don't learn in a classroom. And then I came across to the States, did my master's degree at Wake Forest. Very formative time there. That again was just a 1-year course, so that was very intense. And then got hired by a company in New York, and so now I work as a translator and quality manager for translation. But yeah, I've always been fascinated by languages. I've always loved, learning languages. I'm trying to teach myself American Sign Language now, and that kind of is fascinating to me, how they do things and stuff. But yeah, sorry. So I do French and Spanish into English. Those are my LPs. I like to think I can do some Portuguese, Italian, that kind of stuff, but not really.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And that actually leads perfectly into the next set of questions, which is about what your professional endeavors. So what are you doing now? And you kind of talked a little bit about how you got there, but yeah, if you could go into a little bit more about like your job at TransPerfect and what that entails, and maybe like kind of a day in the life of Peter at TransPerfect.
Sure. So I was fortunate enough that a former colleague of mine reached out to Professor Burgos at Wake, and said, hey, we've got a position open, we need somebody to fill it. Is there anybody that you know? And Professor Burgos was kind enough to put me forward for that. And yeah, so I've been there for about 3.5 years. And the good thing about TransPerfect, one of the good things about TransPerfect is that in my role as a linguist, I kind of set my own, schedule. I've got my hours, I've got my working hours, but I can kind of choose what I want to do throughout the day. So there are jobs that come in, so they got project managers that deal with all the jobs, and they kind of have the jobs available for the linguists to take. And we have internal linguists for all different kinds of languages and LPs. But you know, it's up to me and up to each individual linguist to kind of choose what we want to do. So I focus mainly on pharmaceutical, life sciences stuff. So we have a lot of American clients that are sponsors for clinical trials. So we have like a lot of discharge reports and ethics committee letters, all that kind of stuff. And that's where I kind of focus on. Legal stuff is, what's the word I'm looking for? Not intense, but can be very dull and unimaginative. Whereas life sciences, for me, is really interesting. The vocabulary, I learn a lot. Stuff I probably should have known already, but you know, a good understanding of like how the body works and the drugs and all this kind of stuff, you know, the pathologies. But yeah, a basic day in my life involves, like I said, I can decide how much I want to translate versus how much I proofread other people's translations. But I also am pretty involved with training other people as well. So kind of getting that interaction, not only training new linguists to kind of show them how we do things, how we follow the style guides, the glossaries, client instructions, preferences, that kind of thing. But then I also do a lot of training with the new PMs, the project managers that get hired, so that there's good communication and that we're working together, you know, so that the project managers and the linguists are working together, and that there's not this kind of clash where, you know, they're doing something that really doesn't help us, or we're doing things that they don't really, you know, which I really enjoyed, because that promotes, you know, good teamwork and us working together and making sure that, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, it's making sure my life is easier and their life is easier as well, to making sure that we can both do everything that we need to get done and we're not hindering each other. But I also deal with a lot of terminology stuff as well, and translation memories. I'm heavily involved with one client, and I'm kind of like the go-to person for that client. So I make sure that, you know, all their style guides, all their reference material, their glossaries, all that kind of stuff is up to date, and making sure that whatever they want, you know, in a file or in a job, like I have that locked down, and make sure that all that information is given in the right way, so that all the other people working on the job know what's up and know what the client's preferences are. Like I said as well, I also do with translation memories and glossaries and stuff. So I'll make sure that I clean that up, and I go through that and make sure that everything's good and there are no mistakes in there, and that everything is still, you know, the translations are good, but that everything is still following the client's preferences, translation style guides and things like that. But yeah, it's a fun job. Like I said, there's a lot of different things that I can do. I also carry out like, you know, I check quality for external linguists as well, because we have a lot of external linguists. We have internal linguists. We also have external linguists that we contract work out to, but we want to make sure that that work is good. So I carry out kind of checks to make sure that, you know, the work that a certain external linguist is providing is good quality, and that it's not just, you know, they're not just delivering garbage. You know, we want to make sure that the work that we're paying them to do, they're actually doing, and that the client is getting good quality files. So I do that as well, and then translate a little bit here, proofread a little bit here, and that, like I said, that's one of the great things about the job, is that I can kind of organize my day how I want to, as long as I'm, you know, as long as I'm doing work, and I can't just sit around and twiddle my thumbs, but I can kind of choose what I want to do, and that freedom comes with, you know, the 3.5 years that I've been at the company. They kind of give you more leeway to do what you enjoy most. You know, after you've been at a company for a while, and you know what needs to be done, and you can really do make an impact and add value to the jobs that you're touching and the clients that you're working with.
Awesome. Madison and I are actually in Dr. Burgess's localization class right now, and we're,
okay,
you know, getting a taste of the Trados and TMs, and we're working on term bases right now. So this is all super relevant for us and really interesting to talk to someone who's right there in it and actually doing it professionally. So
yeah, that was a really helpful class, because when I first started at TPT, I think they kind of, obviously they trained me and, they gave me, but there was kind of an expectation that you had at least a basic understanding of how it all fits together, and how TMs work, and then how glossaries work, and just a basic setup of a CAT tool. I mean, obviously Trados is probably what you're going through with Dr. Burgos. We use our own proprietary software, but realistically, if you know one, you kind of know them all. It's all the same kind of layout and things. But yeah, that was a very helpful class. So I recommend it to anybody who's interested in working internally for a language service provider, or externally, or working in translation in general. Super useful class to take. And Dr. Burgos he's just a fountain of knowledge. He knows a lot of things. So I highly recommend any classes that he's taking, and specifically that class.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting class for us so far. So we also wanted to ask about, did you always know that you wanted to be a translator / like what drew you to translating over interpreting?
Like I said earlier, I always knew that I wanted to be involved in languages somehow. And, things just kind of seemed to fall into place for me. Then when I got accepted to Wake to do interpreting and translation studies, I think I realized that I'm one of those people that will question and be like, well, does that word like exactly mean that in that, and I'll look at like the nuances and really question, okay, well, does that really mean the same thing across both languages? And I think it just kind of felt more natural for me to go into translation. And obviously in the way the ITS course is set up, you deal with translation before you deal with interpreting. And I think it felt more natural to me. It felt like that was, more in line with, the skills for translation kind of felt more in line with the skills that I had. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy interpreting. I really did. I just felt like that wasn't, and I enjoy doing it whenever I have to, interpret for, whatever out in everyday life. I don't interpret anything serious, but and the internship that I did, and all that kind of stuff, all the experience that I've had interpreting, I've always loved. It's always been a great experience. I've always loved it, but I think I get too caught up in the, I said that, and I don't think that's exactly, quite the right, whereas translation, I can sit and look at a word for 20 minutes if I want to, and I can check and look at different dictionary definitions, or check different glossary, or, and because I really like getting the precision of a translation and the decision of, okay, well, is it worth omitting this so that the readability is better and it's, it reads better in the translation, or is it worth trying to keep that in and then affect, and make the translation a little bit more clunky? Those kind of decisions about the style, about the accuracy, whereas in interpreting, you just don't have time to kind of make those decisions. You've kind of just gotta go with it. And if you say something, you just gotta roll with it and keep going. Whereas I think for me, I was always like, I said that, but I probably shouldn't have done. And then, there were already 3 sentences ahead of me, and then my décalage was all off, and I was like, freaking out. So I always enjoyed interpreting, but I think my skills are probably more in line with the skills needed to translate. But then again, this job also came up, and I felt like it kind of just fell right into place. I would like to do some interpreting, but and we do interpreting and transperfect. It's kind of just like a different branch. We have a translation branch, and then we have, interpreting, and then a whole other different, we do subtitling and all these other different kinds of things. So yeah. I think, like I said, I think I realized pretty quickly that I was probably more of a translator than an interpreter. But
Yeah.
they're both great.
Yeah, and it's really good and interesting that we're talking to you about this and about your positive experiences with translation, because we've done a handful of interviews previously with people who really strongly favor interpreting. So it's really cool to hear the perspective of somebody who's like super jazzed up about the translation side of things.
Interesting. Okay.
So yeah, I'm glad that we can include that perspective in the in kind of the final product that is these interviews.
Right. Well, I'm glad that I was able to provide that side of things. That's interesting. I think maybe interpreting is seen as kind of more like the cool, chic, look at me, I'm interpreting kind of thing, and like, interpreting in a hospital or interpreting at a conference, whereas translation is kind of more sat at a desk and, reading files. But yeah, I think it just depends on what you prefer, and I think I prefer translation. So.
Yeah, definitely. So that's actually perfect transition. So you mentioned you love like the precision and the time that it allows you to make like exact sort of decisions. But is that your favorite thing, or what do you like most about translating? And the follow-up to that is then, what is the greatest challenge about translating or your job?
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword, because I do love the precision of it, but then you've also got to be precise,
Mm-hmm.
And I think like part of the reason I love it is because you can be precise. And growing up, I always preferred like math subjects, or things where it's like either you got 5.82 or you didn't. Like those are the two options. You either correct or you weren't. And I like that kind of precision. So I'm always looking for that. Okay, that word doesn't quite mean that, but that word is exact. And I mean, not necessarily in a professional sense, but I know people get so frustrated with me because, I'll kind of question them and say, oh, you said this, but did you mean that? Or did you, and they're like, Peter, we just what I meant, where I'm like, well, I don't mind and I don't care. They're not quite the same, because, that's what I do for 8 hours a day. Like I've really got to try and get that meaning. Whereas like in everyday life, nobody cares about that kind of stuff, but so I would say that is definitely one of the things that I like about it, but it also can have a negative impact as well. And the subjective nature of language, language is very subjective, and then you throw in the fact that you're changing one language to another language. There's just so much subjectivity there. It can be hard because there are times when you can think, okay, this is the right translation, and then somebody else says, well, no, I think this is a better translation. And it's kind of like, well, there's no way to objectively say, hey, this is better or this is more accurate. And not to get too into it, but that's what my master's final project was on, was trying to determine and create a measurement, a way to measure how accurate is this translation. Is there any meaning that's gained? Is there any meaning that's lost in this translation? Because again, I just think that precision is so interesting for me. But then as well, I think it depends on what kind of translation you're doing. Like my translation, it's got to be pretty direct. I can't really be too flowery with anything, because it's all, pharmaceutical companies, there are serious adverse events. They've got to know what's happened, and it's got to be pretty exact with what the source says. I can't mess around with that too much. But if you're doing, literary translation, if you're, we just had the conference, the Asian Pacific conference held by Wake. If you're translating poetry, like good luck, you know, because there's just so much symbolism. They got literary devices, you know, and that is also quite fun because then you don't necessarily have the precision, but you have these other things you kind of have to factor in. You know, you have to make it impactful for the reader, and you've got to try and change. You've got to try and keep the consistency, but change the medium of change the way that you're getting that meaning across. And there are times when I have that kind of file, that kind of job to work on, where I've got a little bit more leniency with how I word things or how I can change things, so that it's not exactly, you know, the translation isn't an exact replica of what was said in the source, but the way it's translated makes more sense in the translation, and with the same meaning, but it sounds better and it flows better and it works better in that target language. So I just think there's so many different elements and different things you can think about with the translation, and it all depends on the context, depends on, you know, whom the client is and what the purpose of the translation is. Stuff that I'm presuming you're both are very familiar, that have been in classes at Wake. Yeah, and I guess the biggest challenge I have, yeah, it's probably a lot of what I just said. You know, it's subjective, and then, you know, you've got to be pretty precise with things, but it all kind of, it flows and depends on the kind of job you're working on, the subject matter, you know, what the client wants specifically. If the client's going to just skim the file and just kind of wants a basic idea, then accuracy isn't too important. So, you know, that's not too much of a problem. But if the client's going to use that file to give it to patients, for example, or give it to the providers, or if that file is then going to be translated into a different language, you know, you've got all these different considerations to think about, and it can get, you know, a simple task can become very complicated and complex very quickly. So I think, yeah, I mean, as well, I think one of the biggest pet peeves I have is people that don't, you know, and it's maybe unfair for me to think that way, but people, a lot of people don't know the difference between translation and interpreting. A lot of people don't understand how it works and what goes on, and, you know, they don't understand they've got, you know, to be a translator, to be an interpreter, you've got to have that skill set. People confuse translators and interpreters. They think they're the same thing. People will throw in linguists as well because they think that's the same thing as well. And I think in general, translators, interpreters, people that work in the language field and language service providers don't get respect, but I think a lot of people just don't understand how language or translation or interpreting works. But I'll get off my, I'll stop my rant there.
Oh, we appreciate, you know, it's the whole point of this interview is to hear about, you know, your thoughts and experiences. So, you know, don't feel bad about talking, because that's the whole point.
Yeah.
So yeah, is there anything else that you would like to share about your job? Any memorable or funny moments that you've come across, or anything that surprised you?
Trying to rack my brains, because there's so much, you know, there's so much that happens in so many jobs that I see. I think I looked up, I just casually looked up, you know, a page where I keep all the, you know, check of all the jobs that I've done. And basically in the last year, I've done 1 million words, which was kind of mind blowing to me. And that's only the last year, you know, so it's 3.5 years. So that was kind of crazy to see that I've actually done that many words, and that's, you know, proofreading, translation, quality management. So it's not that I've translated that many words. That would be a lot of words. But it's kind of cool to see that over a year, you know, you're working 5 days a week, you can really crank out a lot of words. But like I said as well, I do from time to time get like a cool, quote unquote job. I love all the jobs that I do. I love my job. But I did do a subtitling job once, and it was just really cool because I hadn't really studied subtitling that much. I never really covered it, you know, during my education. There was like 15 minutes of one class at undergrad that briefly went over subtitling. And so this job kind of came through and I was hesitant. I was like, oh, I don't know, you know, I don't know whether I'm like qualified to do that or not. And my manager was like, yeah, go on, give it a go. And it was just a lot of fun. Like it's difficult because you've kind of got to match, you know, and there's different levels of that as well. Because you've got a character count, obviously you can't put everything on the screen at once. And then if you really want to get into it, you can also try and match the mouth sounds of the words as you would read the text and match the sounds that the actors are making when they are saying the words, obviously in a different language, you know, things like that, where you can get really technical and really try and, you know, make your subtitling perfect. But, you know, again, and like sometimes what they say, you can't say exactly in the translation because you don't have enough space for it, or you don't have enough time or whatever. And I just had a lot of fun kind of like, I won't say messing around. I wasn't messing around. I was obviously doing my job, but, you know, changing things and editing things to try and make sure that, you know, I could give them the best translation.
Yeah, thank you so much for all that. It was, like we said, super insightful to hear the translation perspective of things, especially personally, like I came in thinking I was leaning more towards translation, and I'm glad I've got the opportunity to explore both in the program. But no, your point of view has really been very helpful. But
I'm sorry. I just want to say I'm thankful to be here and being able to give this interview, and yeah. I'm glad that we have people interested in translation.
Yeah, and it's been valuable for me to hear the perspective from you as a translator too, because I'm definitely more drawn towards the interpreting side, but it's kind of cool to hear like, oh, you know, like maybe I could do this and this, like like I don't know. It's cool for me, even if I'm not naturally drawn to the translation side of things, like to hear that perspective. And
right,
there's certain things about it that you've described that do resonate with me as well. So
right, and I think as well, not in my situation, but I know other situations, and you know, I know other people that they kind of do a mix of both. You know, like if you're working as a medical interpreter in a hospital, for example, there are going to be times when, you know, you're going to have to write down prescriptions, or you're going to have to whatever, you know, and there's going to be times when you have to kind of translate a little bit too, or, you know, if there's patient material that they're given, you know, and you can use both. You know, you don't just have to focus on one, but yeah.
So kind of switching gears a little bit, since it is the 10th anniversary of the ITS program, we wanted to ask if you have any fond memories from your time at the program, any formative classes or projects or times with professors or your cohort that you would want to share with us today.
Well, I mean, it was, I mean, as you well know, it's an intense time. You know, since leaving Wake Forest, I heard that apparently people refer to it as a work forest, which, yeah, not surprised, because it was intense, you know, and the classes were hardcore, and there was a lot of information, and they had very high expectations of you. All the professors, you know, within the ITS program, they expect a lot from you, and they expect a lot when you come in, they expect a lot when you come out. But you've got some solid professors there, you know. Professor Fermanic, Dr. Fermanic, she's incredible. What she knows, and what she can do, and the languages that she speaks, and the career, or, you know, everything that she's done in the past, you know, the book that she published, incredible. And then the program, obviously, that she directs as well, Professor Burgos. Big fan of Professor Burgos. He was my director for my applied translation project. Is that what they call it? ATP?
Applied research project.
Applied research project, ARP, that's right, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I had a love-hate relationship with that, but Professor Burgos was fantastic. He was on top of everything. He was fighting in my corner, and we worked through things together, and he was always available. And again, he knows a good amount as well, very knowledgeable. Dr. Rosenberg as well. Oh man, stories about Dr. Rosenberg. I think his medical, obviously, you know, in the medical, not in the medical field now, but with a lot of the work that I do is medical translation. So his class on medical terminology was huge, super important. Even if it was more interpreting based, the knowledge was super helpful for me in my job today. And he's just a funny guy. You know, you could tell he's just happy to be there and happy to be teaching and happy to be interacting with the students.
Yeah, we've got 2 classes with him this semester, Mackenzie and I do.
Yeah, he's a really good guy. He knows his stuff as well. Like, you know, I think a lot of people don't realize that he is very knowledgeable as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think people don't give him enough credit for the stuff that he knows. And then obviously you've got Professor Gonzalez. I was lucky enough to co-author a chapter of his book with him.
He talked about you all the time. We took his class last year. He, like, literally, he's your biggest fan. Like, he's like the #1 fanboy for Peter Till, honestly.
Oh, all right, there we go. Happy to hear it. Yeah, I mean, he was a barrel of laughs as well. His class. The problem is that we only had 1 class with him in that first semester. But he's very passionate about, you know, his linguistics and things like that, and just seeing things from a different point of view that I'd never even thought about before. And he was able to open our eyes to be like, hey, well, you know, this. And we were like, wow, okay. You know, everything that we thought we knew, we didn't know. And there was so much more that we don't know that we thought we did. And just different ways of looking at things and analyzing speech and sentence structure and all that kind of stuff. And then obviously with the translation aspect of it as well. Wow, I mean, I didn't have that big of a class. Obviously with the Chinese track and the Spanish track, there were only 5 of us in the Spanish track, so not that many, but we formed a pretty tight-knit group because if you didn't work together, you didn't make it through.
Right.
You know, so I know that Devin Gilbert did his PhD up at Kent State, and now he's an associate professor at Utah Valley University. You know, talking to the man, he knows what he's talking about, and a really good guy as well. It was a lot of fun. I still talk with Angela on a regular basis. She's fantastic too. You know, and Jose, he got this great job straight out of Wake, and I was really jealous about it. And yeah, I think we all struggled for that year, but you know, we kind of just all bonded together, and it's a lot of work, but it definitely pays off, you know. And I think people know that Wake Forest is a legit school, and I think people are starting to realize that the ITS program at Wake Forest is also legit. You know, and yeah, I'm currently applying to do my PhD out in Spain, so hopefully,
good for you.
That's awesome.
Hopefully that'll come back. So yeah, and Professor Burgos is instrumental as well for trying to sort that out. I'm applying to the same school that he got his PhD from. So it was a great conversation where we were just talking one day, and because I was trying to get, you know, my master's ARP project published, and we were talking about it. And
Peter, I am so sorry to interrupt you, but just so you know, we don't have Zoom Premium, and the meeting is going to end in about 4 minutes.
Okay, no worries. Is there anything else?
And it'll just kick us out. So yeah, like if you could maybe like quickly talk about what you were going to talk about, and then we do have one final question, and then we'll hop off. Sorry.
Sure. No, you're good. You're good. I talking away. I remember I talked to him and said, you know, hey, I was thinking about doing a PhD out in Spain. And he said, oh, well, that's great. What kind of schools are you looking at? I named a few. And I said, but the one I really want to go to is this one. And he said, oh, that's where I graduated from, right? I was like, if ever there was a sign in life, that's it,
Absolutely.
And then he pulled up the faculty page and he's like, oh, I know him, I know her, I know him, I know him. I'm like, yeah, just get me in. Just send an email. This guy, Peter Till, get him in. But yeah, sorry, I'll stop talking. Go on.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I'm sorry, I wish we had more time.
No problem.
So to wrap things up, do you have any advice for current or future students of interpreting and translation?
I would say work hard. It will pay off. It's probably pretty rough for you right now, but it definitely will get better. It will get easier. Things will click. And the professors and everybody there at the program, they give you a lot of work and they expect a lot from you, but that's because they know what you can do and they know what the industry expects once you graduate, and they're going to prepare you for that. And if you can get through week, then you're really well set up for the world outside. So just keep going, keep working at it, and yeah, just keep your head down, keep working. Yeah, and it'll come good.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that advice. And thank you so much for your time and sharing all that you've shared